Wes Anderson came to Glenburn many years ago. He finished the script of Darjeeling Limited there. Glenburn came to us.
Tell me about the top floor. I think it's iconic.
We invited Tom Alter, you know, the actor.
Today's guest is someone who didn't just build a hotel, she created a world. Miss Husna is the visionary behind Glenburn Tea Estate and Boutique Hotel in Darjeeling and the exquisitely designed Glenburn Penthouse in the heart of Kolkata. But more than just hospitality, what she offers is a feeling of timelessness, elegance, and an India that whispers rather than shouts. Born in England and now rooted in Bengal, Husna has spent over 2 decades reimagining colonial spaces with intimacy and authenticity. Her properties are not just stays, they are sanctuaries filled with stories, detail, and soul. She's not only hosted the world from royalty to artists, but has quietly and intentionally built one of India's most iconic boutique hospitality brands. It's an honor to have her on Host Diaries today as we explore the life behind the linen, the charm behind the chandeliers, and the women behind Glenburn. How was it that Glenburn came to be?
So very simply, I fell in love with a tea planter who happened to live in Calcutta, and that's how I ended up here. I grew up in England, but my parents sent me to boarding school in India when I was a teenager. I lived in Dehradun at Welham Girls' School, and I was there from the age of 10 to 16. So I really formed a wonderful base of friends, sort of an identity with India while growing up, with the exposure of England where I would return for holidays. And then I continued with my sixth form education. So class 11 and 12, I was back in England. And then on a gap year trip, you know, a gap year is a very in thing to do in England.
Now
and I
everywhere.
moved away from Wellams, not because I didn't like Wellams, but I wanted to go to university in England. And in those days, the ISC wasn't accepted. So you had to do a sort of crammer course for 2 years if you wanted to study. And at 16, the thought of losing a year was sort of disastrous. You sort of thought, how can I be 1 year behind all my peers? So I left in class 10 and went to England to do the IB, which is so trendy now. And I took this gap year because, of course, at 18, suddenly things change and life seems longer. And so I traveled, I worked, I came back to India to meet my school friends. And that is when I met Anshuman, who was also visiting Delhi from Calcutta and Dehradun during his first year of college. And we met and we sort of dated long distance for 6 years. I was in England at university. He was in America and California. At the age of 25, I decided I had worked, traveled, lived in many countries, had all the I did 2 very academic degrees at Cambridge University. So I really felt like I'd been there, done everything. And then eventually I wanted to move closer to Anshuman. So decided to take the plunge and move to Calcutta. It was a city I didn't really know much about at all, but I had a lot of tea estate friends from my boarding school. So in Wellams, there were a lot of girls from the tea plantation. So I'd heard of things like Bagdogra Airport and Howrah train station because our departure parties would come to these places. And I used to write Christmas cards to my friends who lived on Salona Tea Estate in Nagaon district. So these names were very familiar, but I had never visited a tea estate or I never thought I would end up over there. But Anshuman was from a tea family. When we got married, we lived on a tea estate in Kerala for 2 years where God's own country was becoming the thing. We visited a few vineyards in Europe and thought it would be wonderful to have people visit this beautiful tea estate that we were based on in Kerala. But 2 years later, we ended up selling that tea estate. Glenburn came to us. So even though the ancestral property was in Assam, Kongia Tea Estate, Glenburn Tea Estate was something really extraordinary because it not only looked out onto the 3rd highest mountain in the world, it also had 1,000 acres of private forest, 2 rivers, and this wonderful Nepalese community that were looking after us in this sort of bungalow that we inherited. And that's really how it began.
What made you bring strangers into your home? Because you had got such a beautiful tea garden. When did this idea come to you that, we're going to open it up for people?
So I'm a science teacher by profession. That's what I trained as a scientist, as a science teacher. And I never had any interest in sort of history or hospitality, which is something that I can't imagine my life without today, 25 years later. The idea came to us really because when we bought Glenburn, my father-in-law has been one of the big giants in the tea industry for many years. He was very keen to put Glenburn on the map through marketing. As you might know, Assam tea has a very strong domestic market, but Darjeeling tea is all about the marketing. So he said, right, we have this beautiful estate. We have to sell our tea by creating something very unusual. And he was a real visionary. So he said, we have to make a film. So I called up one of my best friends, Anisha, and I said, right, you're working in this growing kind of media industry in Delhi. This was in the late 90s, no, early 2000s actually. And she said, sure, I can come over and I can bring two cameramen and we can make you a film. So she came across to Glenburn to make a film about Glenburn and Darjeeling tea that we would take to the world to sell the tea. As part of that, we invited Tom Alter, you know, the actor, because he studied at Woodstock with my father-in-law and his
lovely.
sisters and everything. So, because Anisha said, we need the English tea planter. So they all came up with the idea of Tom Alter. So he came across. The funny thing was that when he flew across with Anisha, she'd already done the recce. She had written the script and he read the script on the plane and said, this is far too boring. I don't want to just be a tea planter. Every tea estate has a ghost. So he said, can I be a ghost? So she had to rewrite the script, replan the whole filming schedule. And we'd only scheduled like a day and a half or something for it, or 2 days for it. And Tom Alter became the ghost of Glenburn, who had this wonderful conversation with my late grandmother-in-law, who remembered him from the old days. And they talked about, how the children that he planted many centuries ago kind of rose up through the youth of Glenburn, first flush and things like that today. So that's how the film sort of took life. And while he was with us, he said, this is such a beautiful property. Why don't you invite people to visit it? So that's how the idea was planted. Although we'd been thinking about it in Kerala, we had thought about the idea of tourism. He was the one who actually put it into words and said, you should do something. And he suggested we do something in the forest by the river. So it started off with the idea of doing luxury tents down by the river. And it was a few months later when we started researching tents in Delhi. And in those days, I had a horse and I used to ride in horse shows across the country. So I was traveling with my horse to Delhi for the Delhi Horse Show, and I was disappearing during the day to Chandni Chowk to look at luxury tent providers. And my trainer at the time, Jay Rathore, said, where do you keep disappearing? And I told him I had this crazy plan to set up luxury tents at this tea estate. And he said, why don't you speak to Chloe's mum? Right? Chloe was another girl who used to ride with us, and Chloe's mum apparently did luxury tents. And her name was Bronwyn Latif. She was an Australian who'd lived in India for many years. And he said, go talk to her because she's the pioneer in this and she'll be able to help you out. So I went and knocked on her door and literally introduced myself as this girl from a tea estate in Darjeeling who wanted to set up tents. And while we were having this conversation, she got a call from another stalwart from the East who I didn't know, but was a very close friend of hers, Belinda Wright, the daughter of Bob and Ann Wright.
Yeah.
And she said, Glenburn, my parents went there for their honeymoon or something like that. They know it very well. And she said, you can't do tents there. It's far too wet and damp and, they won't last. So Bronwyn comes back to the table where we were having our chat and said, I'm so sorry. I'm going to talk myself out of a job because I don't think tents are going to work over there. And also during the conversation, she drew my attention to this little invitation card sitting on her table. And it was for the screening of a film by Murad Ali Khan called The Buddha of Badam Tam. And she said, by the way, I've been invited to this screening. Where is Badam Tam? And I said, it's across the valley from Glenburn. And you look across to this incredible Buddha statue by Meera Mukherjee from Glenburn. So these two coincidences happened in the half an hour meeting that we had. At the same time, I was beginning to fall in love with this wonderful lady called Bronwyn. Her house was fabulous. She had beautiful painted ceilings and incredible furniture. And it was quirky and it had this wonderful sort of charm to it. So I came back and I told Anshuman, I said, we can't do tents. Well, we shouldn't do tents, but I'd love to involve her in some way. And she had sort of suggested maybe we could look at little cottages or cabins in the forest. We thought of inviting her out and she accepted. In the meantime, we had also hired a local architect to kind of do a recce. And he had come up with this very expansive plan down by the river of these little cabins gardens and a cascading waterfall, a restaurant on the beach, and things like that, which obviously when she heard, she kind of kept very quiet and sort of escorted us back up to the bungalow after we'd had our meeting on the site down in the forest with our local architect. And she said, I think you're making a mistake. I don't think you should just throw all this money into something that you've never done before. You don't have any experience. So we said, well, what should we do? Everybody keeps saying we should do something with this property. And she looked up at the dilapidated bungalow, which was supposedly the VIP bungalow for the estate, but it was in a pretty sort of bad shape at the time because the previous company had managers who would change every 3 years. So every manager's wife had come and put their personality on the bungalow. So it was a bit of a mishmash of like painted sort of veneers and, pelmet and curtains that really weren't showing the beauty of the bungalow to us. And she said, well, why don't you just strip this bungalow down, build it up to what its original charm was? You have 4 bedrooms. If it works as a hotel, great. If it doesn't, at least you have a beautiful home that you can enjoy. So very sensible. And that is exactly why Bronwyn has been my mentor for 25 years, because she is one of the most creative, talented, but also very sensible people in my life. So that's how it began. So I was given a budget of 5 lakhs.
In what year is this?
2001. We had no clue about hospitality. So, of course, we did overspend that. Bronwyn and I spent the next 6 months just camping out there. We worked with a team of local workers. We used to play Hello Brother on the radio to make them work faster, and we used to give them Coca-Cola treats to get them to finish the job earlier. So we had very creative ways of getting inspiration out of them. But 6 months later, we had stripped the place down, built it up. She had kind of done a recce of every office and bungalow on the estate, and we'd kind of found these old chairs, beds that were like hidden in places, fans, features that we could sort of take out and sort of bring back to the Borough Bungalow. So we opened to our first guests about 6-8 months later. At the same time, she had met a lady at another boutique hotel in India called Marianne Dennison Pender, who ran a marketing company she was just an expert in Indian travel. And so the following summer, when I went to visit my parents, I knocked on her door and said, I've created this bungalow. It has 4 rooms. And she very generously printed out a list of the top 20 India specialist agencies in London and said, just go visit them, tell them what you're doing, and see what happens. So I went and knocked on their doors, told them I had this bungalow on a tea plantation. Would they like to send us guests? And they started to do that. That is exactly how it started.
Amazing. What a journey.
With a complete experiment, no experience, no expectations. And then within 3 years, we'd made it to the Tatler Guide to the Best 101 Hotels in the World. And I had no clue what that meant. But it did make us take ourselves seriously at that point.
I must say you're a lovely storyteller. Like you're able to really articulate.
It's just a story that actually happened, and I'm saying it exactly as it did.
I'd love if you can elaborate on what the Glenburn experience is for people who haven't been. I'm sure you do more than just be another commoditized hotel. So what makes Glenburn unique?
So what makes Glenburn unique is the fine attention to detail that we put into everything we do. And it's just something that is a culture that even 25 years later, an hour ago when I was sitting on my laptop and I get a copy of every email that goes out to a guest or an agent from my team. And if I notice anything that isn't 100% accurate in their description, in their wording, or what they are promising the guests, I'll jump in and say, hi, just jumping in there just to let you know that we can also do this and we can also modify it so that they get this experience. So for me, it's about giving them a perfect stay or experience through those fine details. The luxury is not only in the physical elements, but it's in the luxury of choice and flexibility. So we build in a lot of flexibility into the whole experience. So when they arrive, a package that they have that starts at the airport. So it starts with a welcome letter that's been written by me that they receive in the car with one of our drivers, because people have to come to us in one of our own cars. And we invested in our own transport when we started trying to use local taxis. And somehow, because the roads were so bad in the area, people would arrive in a really bad mood. It's a 3.5-hour journey from the airport. They would arrive wondering where they were coming to. The drivers would give them all sorts of stories about why they shouldn't be staying with us and they should be staying in Darjeeling town. The journey would take a lot longer than it should because people would get lost. We are in the middle of nowhere. We're an hour and a half from Darjeeling town. So immediately my reaction to that was, fine, let's buy our own cars and let's train our own drivers. So our drivers were trained to receive people with a cold towel, homemade glasses of nimbu pani, a welcome letter, a big smile, and a welcome from Glenburn right from the car park at Bagdogra Airport. So that's where the experience begins. Along the way, they will stop at a picnic spot where we will serve them Darjeeling tea in real China cups, which I have hand carried over from England over the last 25 years. I have this huge collection of China cups and teapots, homemade chicken sandwiches or egg or vegetable sandwiches, chocolate brownies that originated from my grandmother's original chocolate brownie recipe. So by the time they got to Glenburn, they were already part of the
Pampered
experience, feeling pampered, right? And then when our road was terrible, they would arrive sort of very shaky, and we would sit them down and offer them a gin and tonic or a glass of wine, give them time to take a few breaths and look around, and then they would be mesmerized. Those are the kind of little details that make the experience.
Do you have any like rituals in your hotel, or like be it in the morning or an evening ritual or something that happens on a regular basis that all the guests, like you recommend a guest to indulge in even if they choose not to?
Absolutely. So our morning ritual is bed tea. At dinner the night before, we ask them what time they would like tea in bed. They're always surprised and intrigued by what this means. And because most of our guests are sort of international guests, they love the fact that somebody just brings them tea in bed. So they pick what they want. Tea. We also serve good coffee, so they can also have coffee if they want to, but it's generally fresh Darjeeling tea from the factory that was probably made the day before. We have homemade cookies there as well. And we have something called the mountain knock. The whole mountain range, Kanchenjunga and the Singalila range, are visible in the months of October, November, December. And then from January to March, it's kind of a little iffy. Sometimes they come out, sometimes they don't. Even through the monsoon, after a big thunderstorm, they will come out. Normally, you would have to wake up at 4 a.m, drive up to Tiger Hill and take a chance. If the mountains come out, they come out. If they don't, they don't. Our mountain knock ensures that if the mountains are not out, you keep sleeping.
Oh, how lovely is that?
But if they come out, you'll get a knock. Our 24-hour staff, our chowkidars, will come escort them out to have tea in front of the mountains. And if not, they get bed tea whenever they wanted. But they didn't have to waste getting up in the morning and trundling up to Tiger Hill to watch the mountains. So that's one ritual. And then in the evening, our other ritual is the idea of sitting everybody around a community table for dinner. That is something that sometimes people are a bit skeptical about, but once they commit to it and do it, it's absolutely magical, because we've had nationalities from all around the world. We've had guests from all around India. We've had all ages, kind of people from different professions sitting around this table, just engaging over this lovely sort of 5-6 course meal. And that's very, very special.
Lovely. I would love to talk to you a little bit about your team, because everyone who I've spoken to speaks very highly about the level of hospitality that is offered at Glenburn. How is it, or what is it that you do to train them to make sure that it feels effortless and not transactional?
My mantra to my staff is that service should be discreet and not in your face, and they should anticipate every need that a guest has. Now, we are blessed because the Nepali community that live and work on the estate beautifully tuned to offer this service without really being trained. You just have to guide them in the sense of telling them what the routine will be. But their natures are so beautifully tuned to hospitality that I haven't had to really give them any hardcore training. I also believe that hospitality is a lot of common sense, which is what I talk about in terms of the anticipating a need. So it's always about noticing what tea they asked for, what time they had breakfast, whether they like their coffee before the meal or after the meal in the morning. If people are out hiking, they're struggling a little bit to go and offer help. We have picnic stop at the end of a hike, but we also have nimbu pani in the rucksack of the guides that are walking with them, and then they'll set something up. There's always a car nearby, so if somebody needs a car, they'll just get into the car and drive the rest of the way. It's all about just being sensible about what do you think a guest would need when they're staying with us in their room, at the table, or when they're out hiking around the estate. I'm not a trained hospitality professional, so I don't believe in training. I just believe inspiring my team to be sensible, to be really diligent and sincere in what they're doing, to smile, to have conversations. We're all on first name basis. We are all the same level. I hate being called the boss or the owner or anything like that, because for me, I'm Husna and my team are the names of the people that they are, and we all work together. So if I see a dirty dish that needs to be picked up, I will pick it up and take it to the kitchen. So they've seen me do that right from day one. And I once had a manager who wanted to be called the CEO of the hotel. And it was very hard to work with that kind of an idea because for me, everybody was the same and we were offering hospitality as we would to a guest in our homes. I've been able to extract this beautiful service from the staff, not because I've tried very hard, but because they innately have it within them. And also, I've just set the example as best as I
think
can.
most of us from most Asian countries, I think we are just better at service, right? Like if you go to
I
any,
think so, yeah.
you go to Thailand, you go to Vietnam, you go to any other city, our sort of knack for being better at service and hospitality somehow comes from it's innate.
It's innate.
Right? You don't need training for something.
But I have to say the staff up there do it so beautifully.
Yeah.
And we do have a lot of, so we have about 60 staff with just 8 rooms. So as a hospitality professional, people do tell me that we're way overstaffed, but then they also multitask. So my housekeeping girls will also take people on a guided walk if they need to. Some of them also do the massages, but they also run the laundry. F&B staff will also do things like that. We have somebody who serves dinner at night, but also bakes cakes during the day. So everybody multitasks. And that is also a very special part of Glenburn, that we're not boxing people into roles. And during the off season, everybody will roll their sleeves up and get onto the cleaning and the painting and the repairing. We have one of our bearers who's a plumber and one of our night guardsmen who's an electrician. And it's just because we know they're talented at these things. So therefore they help us with these jobs. So it's one big family and a community, but it works because it translates into efficiency.
So a little bit about the guest experience. So let's say if I'm a guest and I come to Glenburn, what is the first thing that's going to catch my attention just as I walk in?
As they drive in, right?
Yeah.
Because people drive in. My team is standing there to welcome them. So we have a routine with the drivers. So pretty much every travel agent or guest who books with us will say, give me the driver's number. And I will say, you're not getting the driver's number because it's not safe for them to use a mobile phone when they're driving. Again, sensible things, not because it's written in a manual. So we don't give out our driver numbers, but people can contact Andrew, who's our manager right now. Just before they reach, the drivers will give a call to the manager to say that we're 10 minutes away, done very discreetly. When the guests arrive, Andrew is waiting there with some of my team members who are waiting there with a tray of Glenburn iced tea with a touch of ginger to get rid of the nausea that some people get when they're on a long journey. There'll be a Nepali khada to welcome them. Big smiles, as I said. So they'll get out, they'll breathe in the fresh air, they'll have this sip of our special Glenburn iced tea. Andrew will welcome them with warmth and a smile and introduce himself. And that's the impression that people arrive to, this welcome. They look around and take in, of course, the bungalows and then the rooms after that. But for me, it's the people. And for me, it's that energy that a guest has to feel. So they felt it from the driver at the airport. They felt it in the conversations that the drivers have all the way up to the estate. They're anticipating some of it because they all chat to our drivers and our drivers are encouraged to chat back to the guests. And then when they arrive.
Is there any guest who's left a lasting impression on you? Some story that must have happened which you would remember. It can be positive,
so many.
negative.
No, most of them are positive. There was this wonderful Swiss couple who visited many years ago. I still remember them because I was walking across to one of the bungalows, I think, and he stopped me on the veranda and he said, "Stop, I want you to listen." And I was wondering what he was making me listen to. And he said, "You can hear the earth turning."
Oh, wow.
And it was so powerful and it was so subtly and so beautifully said. And he was basically trying to say, it's so quiet, it's so beautiful up here. You can actually hear and feel the earth rotating. I've never forgotten that. His wife actually owned a tea shop in Switzerland, and she was the first sort of tea shop owner who bought a chest of our tea. Ever since that, every year we send them a chest of our moonshine, and they are the only tea company, I think, that buy without a sample because they trust us. We always know that we're going to send them one of our best invoices. And it changed hands, the shop, and the new owner came and said, I'm going to continue the tradition.
Lovely.
So it's very special. But I still remember her husband. It was some years ago, about 12, 15 years ago, but I still remember it.
I have a counter question now from the previous one. I asked you about name one thing that the guests see when they walk into the property. Now the question is, name one thing that most of the guests overlook, but you would like them to see.
That's a tough one. I mean, most guests notice all the little touches.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of little touches. Like I talked about the china. Then at dinner, we have little name cards in little sort of teapots. What I'd love for them to notice, and to be fair, some of them do, and I'd love my staff to sort of notice this too, is the effort that goes into bringing those items of fine detail to Glenburn. So every summer for 25 years, I have trekked across London looking for old teacups and teapots, and I have hand carried them back to my house, and I have stayed up nights bubble wrapping and newspaper wrapping them, and I have packed them in our suitcases. When my kids were young, all their travel allowance would be filled with china. Now I have to negotiate it because they're a little older. They shop for themselves. But the kind of journey that all these things, from the prints on the walls, I have all these prints of butterflies and insects and birds that again I've collected over years, even the electric blankets on the bed. It's all taken not just a physical effort of me, but a commitment to searching it out on my own. And I keep telling my staff, I was like, over there, nobody carries it for me. Like, I will physically walk back half an hour to my parents' house with these heavy bags of china and physically pack it myself and then check it in myself and this, that, and the other. And sometimes I'm not sure how much that sort of energy that goes into creating what we've created is noticed. A lot of guests do. I guess some people would miss that because they wouldn't quite imagine that somebody would put that into creating a hotel. Like, people don't do that. That is the appreciation that we get when people come to us, because the ones that do notice are like, I can imagine what an effort it took to create like a teacup collection of like 60 different cups and saucers that, you know, in the middle of this remote place and things like that.
It's a labor of love.
It's a labor of love. Thank you. That's the word. That's the word.
What inspired you and your team to open the Glenburn Penthouse in Kolkata? It feels like a completely different universe from the Glenburn in Darjeeling. The architecture is different. The style of the interiors are different. Like, they are not modern, I would say, but they are, how do I say?
City versus country.
Yeah, it's a city. Exactly.
It's a city hotel.
Yeah, it's still very you. But what inspired you to open a city hotel from a remote property like Glenburn?
Yeah, so that's another interesting story. Do you remember I started off by saying I was a science teacher?
Yeah.
And that was my academic background. I almost became a doctor, and had I not fallen in love with Anshuman, I probably would have gone on to med school. I was accepted by 4 med schools, but I knew that at the age of 23, it would have taken another 10 years to graduate. So I said, listen, if anything's going to happen after the 6 years of dating, then it's got to happen now. So I went back to Cambridge for a teaching degree because that was a shorter duration. And I'm very happy because I think it was the knowledge I was after that I really enjoyed. So when I was living in Calcutta and running Glenburn, we had the occasional guest who would ask me about Calcutta. They would ask me about my great-grandmother got married in a church. In fact, that was the first one I was asked. It was called St. John's. And I called up a few people I knew. Nobody knew where St. John's was. Nobody knew where Council House Street was. Most of the members of our family had no clue about some of the historical places that my guests knew from England because they had read about them or they'd heard about them. So I started digging deeper under the skin of the city to try and unearth these things because of requests that I had. And I went on Heritage Walk of Dalhousie Square with an architect called Manish Chakravarti, probably about 22 years ago. I was amazed at the buildings, and I found St. John's Church, which he was at that time restoring with the International Monuments Fund, I think. It was a jungle. It was like, now it's a beautifully maintained church. In those days, it really was a church that not many people had heard about. We had a group that wanted a lecture on history. So we requested Dr. Rudrangshu Mukherjee, who's a history expert, to give them a talk at the Bengal Club. And I had just done the walk with Manish. He had told me he could only do it on a Sunday, which was a bit of a problem because guests come on all days of the week. And then I listened to Dr. Mukherjee talk about the story of Calcutta. For 45 minutes in the Bengal Club, he told us this story, and I was just so moved by it because it linked back to the buildings that I had seen and the walk that I had done. I was suddenly hungry to find out more, and I started reading. I fell in love with history, which was a subject that I laughed at when I was in school. You know, I was a hardcore scientist. I was like, why would you learn about history? It's such a waste of time. And suddenly I was living in the city that was steeped in history, and I couldn't get enough. So I read and I read, and I almost feel like I did a whole degree in history just because of that. Along with a cousin of mine, Devika, who had Bengali genes that I didn't, we put together this little morning tour of Calcutta. So we put together this walk, and then we would take them for a meal. In fact, I visited one of her friends' homes in an old historical building, and I said, oh, can I bring my guests here? So it started with this visiting an old home and interacting with one of our friends. And that was my way of getting people under the skin of the city with locals, but also bringing in the history with the knowledge, the expert knowledge that I was building up. Before I knew it, I had started doing these tours of Calcutta that grew from just a morning walk to a full day tour. And I had a lot of French expat friends, one of whom was a photographer, Natalie, and she used to take me walking up to North Calcutta, to the markets and the old buildings. So suddenly I discovered North Calcutta. Then I learned about the Bengal Renaissance. I learned about the whole movement of communities, cultures, and the history of the city right from 1690, when it was so-called founded, all the way up to through the 19th century and the Bengal Renaissance to the start of the freedom struggle, the shift of the capital in 1911. And suddenly I had this incredible story to tell over not one morning, but eventually 3 days that took you through the culture, history, gastronomy, and the local people of the city. And then it became the region of Bengal, which included Bihar, Orissa, Bangladesh as well. I had this experience that I started offering to guests who were staying at other hotels. So we would meet them in the morning, pick them up, take them around the city for either 1 day, 2 days, or 3 days, and then drop them back. And that became the Glenburn experience in Calcutta. But we didn't have a hotel. And we were always thinking about an old building that we would convert. And we looked at a few, but they all had challenges. And eventually, my husband Anshuman was working on a building within the Kannat building, which was also a heritage building that belonged to the family. When he built up this new building that was on the site of the old warehouse of the Army and Navy stores that Kannat building used to be, he saw the view from the 7th floor. The building was taking shape. He suddenly realized that if we were to do a hotel and the tours were becoming so successful and the tea estate was also doing incredibly well, he said this is where it had to be. So forget a heritage building with these commanding views of Victoria Memorial, the Maidan, Fort William, the 2 bridges. You can even see the high courts and the governor's house from there, the old fort, the general post office, everything you can see from that site. So he called Bronwyn up in the middle of the night. I think I was traveling at the time. And he said, come on, Bronwyn, you've got to come over. I've got to show you our new project. Suddenly, Bronwyn was called over to create this hotel that was actually in an ugly office building that had no pillars. It was a glass box. It was planned as an office building. Luckily, he had reinforced the foundations to go up a couple of floors just in case permission was granted. So we were able to add a swimming pool to the roof. Bronwyn and I spent the next 6 or 7 years creating the Glenburn Penthouse out of this glass box that didn't have any plumbing because an office was just supposed to have 2 bathrooms. And suddenly we had to incorporate 9 suites into this. Another labor of love.
Yeah, 100%.
we did not open until it was perfect. It actually took us 6 or 7 years collecting furniture, working out how to give the place character. My original tagline for it, which actually came from my brother-in-law, who is a very good writer, just over 100 years after the capital moved from Calcutta, elegance and style returns to the city in the form of the Glenburn Penthouse, because we were due to open in 2012 and 1911 was when the capital shifted to Delhi.
Correct.
So he came up with this beautiful phrase about how all that was going to return to Calcutta in the form of the Glenburn Penthouse. Of course, we didn't open till 2018, so it was a little bit over 100 years. If you're building a project, you have deadlines. If you're creating something that is truly something that you want to be perfect, it takes longer.
Tell me about the top floor. I think it's iconic. The sitting lounge, I think that is what it is that you've created with all the beautiful tapestry and the wallpaper and the views of all the various places, as you mentioned. How is that room conceptualized?
So like I said, it took us almost 6 or 7 years, but all credit to Bronwyn. I do not have a creative bone in my body. I get the credit for Glenburn, but it's got nothing to do with me. She loves working with me because I help her get things done. And together we work as this team where she comes up with these incredible suggestions. Sometimes we debate them, sometimes we argue about them. We talk through them. And then she calls it playing sometimes. When we were placing the beds in all the rooms, she was like, okay, now hop into bed with me. We have to lie here and imagine the view. So the beds weren't even there. It was just like an empty room. But she was like, come on, hop into bed with me. Because when you're lying in bed, everything you look at has to be beautiful, from the fans to the cornice to the windows. So we had to place the windows at ideal places so that everything in that room was perfect. The bathrooms. So everything that she designs has this beautiful logic to it. So I remember at Glenburn, when we used to do the curtain, she would say, you can't have lining on the curtains. You've got to have beautiful fabric on both sides, because what if you're walking around in the garden? You've still got to see beauty. She taught me how to set up picnics in the middle of the forest, where she said, you can have beautiful hand-embroidered linen even sitting in the forest. You can have a tablecloth. You can have chairs. You just have to find a way to transport them down there. You can serve beautiful cutlery and crockery down in the forest or on a picnic. There was never a sense of plastic cups or wrapped in newspaper like you might do a regular picnic. It was always about beauty everywhere. So the penthouse came from the same ideal and the same kind of idea that we wanted perfection in terms of everything that we did. So it took us a long time to source certain things. I remember the tables in the rooms and even the tables in the sort of drawing room. We didn't have them for a long time because she said, I just need to find the perfect type. And then eventually it took a visit to Udaipur where my daughter happened to be participating in a swimming competition from her boarding school. And I said, oh gosh, Anushka's visiting Udaipur. Can we find a reason to go there? Because I want to sneak up. I want to meet her at the airport or something silly like that. And she said, we haven't actually looked in Udaipur. So we went there and that's where we found the solution to some of our tables. So that's what I meant. It was all very organic. It wasn't like she set out with a plan. She had to feel the room. She had to feel the solutions. And we had to find solutions for a lot of things because it was a modern building. So she was used to restorations, whereas we had to create the heritage. And that was what she did.
It took you 6 years, to build this entire thing. Is there any moment of time that you thought that it's not possible, I want to give up?
Oh, many. Well, I knew we couldn't give up because we were committed to it. Yeah. And I'm not the sort of person who gives up. It was challenging. But
what's the most fulfilling part of this being a host, right? Like after you've built it, you have all these beautiful guests coming and giving you these testimonials. You have the whole town talking about it. You've got all these magazines also writing about it. You had this dream and you've reached that dream. So in this journey, what was the most fulfilling part? And also you can tell me what the most hardest part was.
Yeah, I think the most fulfilling part is conversations with guests. Okay. I have so many conversations with my guests, be it around the dinner table at Glenburn or sitting at the penthouse having a cup of tea with them. I try and meet every guest who comes. I also lead tours myself as well. So sometimes I'm out with them on tours. I think it takes a certain kind of person to want to come to Calcutta because it's such a misunderstood city. So it's not the city that people would put on their list of places that they want to visit. But when they come, the biggest reaction I get is, I had no idea the city was so interesting, so clean, the traffic isn't bad, it's green, and the people are so wonderful. It's a city you can walk through the streets, you can have conversations with the chai shop owners, with the flower market vendors, the people on the ferry. When I walk people through the flower market, I make them walk across the bridge and then onto a local ferry, and we'll have conversations with people going to office in the morning. Calcutta is such an incredible city. There's a similar story in Glenburn with the tea and the Nepali community and how they ended up there. So these conversations are nuggets of knowledge and inspiration that people sort of discover through their conversations with me. And that is incredibly fulfilling because they literally come away saying, I had no idea. People talk about the depth of knowledge that they get and the experiences that they immerse themselves into as being one of the highlights of their trips. To me, that's amazing. And also they find Calcutta is one of their favorite cities. Yeah. They end up saying that, and it's genuine. It's genuine. I still remember the first couple I took around I think they were an Israeli couple, and we were on the river and we were doing our sunset tour, and they were like, but those kids jumping into the water are just like kids on our beaches or, at home, and they're just the same. It was just the idea that Calcutta wasn't the city of the dead and the dying. And Calcutta was actually a city that was more alive than any other city they'd been to in India, in the right way, and not in the way that it's been labeled because of certain incidents that have happened since the 1940s. They don't know the history before that. And the current vibe of the city is so powerful in terms of their love of food, their love of sport, their love of everything, of politics, of, standing up for what's right, the melting pot with all the different communities, the way they celebrate all the festivals from Durga Puja to Christmas to Eid. It's just this incredible city. And I'm not Bengali and I'm not from here, right? So the fact that I have fallen so deeply in love with the city is a testament to something. It didn't come to me on a platter. It was something that just,
and it does have that energy in it.
It does.
I don't know how it does it, but it does have that.
It does it because it's there. It's there. It just needs to be shown and told.
Yeah. Where do you see Glenburn 5 years from now? Do you feel like you're at a state where you don't want to expand? Do you want to expand? Have you ever thought about franchising it? And is there any nervousness with that model?
Absolutely. I'm terrified of expanding because I am such a control freak and I'm so bad at delegating. I just need to know that I can offer that perfect experience to every single guest who walks in my door. I think the expansion has been in the form of experiences and perfecting our experiences and expanding them. During COVID, I was fortunate enough to travel out into rural Bengal and I discovered Shantiniketan through a dear friend who lives there. I discovered Murshidabad. I discovered a beautiful indigo plantation near Kalna run by a wonderful family over there that I now take my guests to. There were these extensions to the city experience that I was able to discover. And now we actually also run tours of Bengal. So I lead some myself. I've sort of helped curate a 9-day journey through Bengal, which I call the story of Bengal. There are also wonderful other properties that we work with in Murshidabad, outside the city as well, in Orissa as well. It's lent itself to the story of Bengal in the way that I like to tell it and through the details that we include in these journeys. So that's been one form of expansion. We are adding a third bungalow to the Glenburn Tea Estate experience, and that should be ready in a year's time. Of course, I'm terrified of doubling our rooms from 8 to 16, but 16 is still a small hotel. But it'll allow us to accept more bookings because we are currently sold out for a lot of nights, going all the way up to next April. I mean, there are a lot of nights where we do have rooms, but there are certain nights when we are sold out where groups, small groups can't visit us because we don't have enough rooms. So I think there was a natural expansion path for the tea estate. We are planning to complete this bungalow by next year, and it's going to be fabulous. Those are two expansion plans that we have. But I could never tell you where I see Glenburn in 5 years' time, because when I started, I would never have imagined that this is where I would be 25 years on. It's always been organic growth. I've had the courage to not say no to anything. So when we had the bad road, when we had, the strikes in Darjeeling, I've actually called up friends in Jet Airways where I've had my guests traveling from Delhi to Bagdogra and have had them get off in Guwahati because it was a hopping flight, just because there was a bandh happening in Darjeeling, and I organized for them to go to Kaziranga instead. I've never said no to anything, and I've always found a solution, even when we've had challenging times. So Glenburn has always endured, and it's never shut down, and it's never been limited by things that have happened politically or for any other reason, because I've never been able to say no to something, and I've always found a way to make it work. I hope Glenburn will endure into the next 5 years, but where it will end up or how it'll change has always been something that I've just allowed happen in many ways, organically.
Lovely. So boutique hospitality, especially when it comes to heritage hotels being renovated and many independent stays, homestays, tea gardens, Chettinad homes in Tamil Nadu. You're seeing a huge sort of expanse in this market over the last 10, 20 years. What advice would you give for any person who wants to start one of their own? What would be some token of advice from somebody who's so experienced in this domain?
It's just very simple. Just get involved, use the local community, and be authentic and genuine to what your location is and what your story is in that location. Stay true to that in terms of, I would say, even the architecture and the design and stuff like that, although you do have mixes, I guess, these days. Use the local footprint that you have in terms of the community and the materials and the experience in terms of what people do, rather than trying to change that too much. Today, people really want that authenticity, and they want that real hospitality that comes through. And you can't take shortcuts with that. And I don't think we've ever taken a shortcut. We've always done what has needed to be done to offer that experience. And if you start with that, then everything fits in going backwards. But if you start at the back and then try and build up to the experience, it's kind of hard to make it work.
Are there any causes that your organization or both the hotels such as Glenburn support to enrich the lives of the community?
Yes, absolutely. If you remember, I mentioned that I'm a teacher by profession. Something I started off on a very small scale about 20 years ago was an education charity on the estate. So we have the Glenburn Estate Foundation that has been supporting the local government primary schools and also providing scholarships, financial scholarships for students right from nursery all the way up to college for them to attend private schools in the area. So over the last 20 years, we've educated about 70 children through this program. And it's been supported by a lot of our guests who kind of adopt a child, but then sometimes they don't follow through it because it's a 14-year journey for each child if they're starting in nursery. So it's something that is very much a part of the experience because the guests will visit the local primary school. They will talk to a lot of staff whose children have grown up through this program. A lot of them come back to visit the hotel when they're on holiday. We've had interns who've given them extra classes. We have an annual Christmas party for them where they come and meet the guests as well. The Glenburn Estate Foundation is a cause very close to my heart. We do try and bring that into the experience. We're always looking for support because once a child is in school, I will not pull them out. So even if the funding dries up from the original sources, we have to find a way to put it back. And we're desperately trying to get CSR and FCRA status so that we can involve the guests even more in this cause that's very close to my heart.
We do a small rapid fire round inspired by Mr. Johar. Funnily enough, it's not really rapid because I make you think slightly more.
Okay.
Right?
You.
And what we do is the questions are made for maybe one word, one sentence answers. You can be as free and on the spot. Okay, so here we go. One room at Glenburn that you secretly love the most.
The Singalila suite.
An item that every guest should find in their room.
In the winter, the electric blankets.
Ah, lovely. 3 things that are always there in your hosting checklist.
Homemade nimbu pani, homemade cookies, and a big smile.
Lovely. One dish that has always been on the breakfast menu.
Eggs Benedict.
Hosting or being hosted? Which one do you prefer?
Hosting, absolutely. Yeah.
Early check-ins or late checkouts? Which one is more stressful?
Early check-ins and late checkouts to maximize the experience.
One local dish that everyone must try.
Nepali pork curry.
Oh, lovely. Describe Glenburn in one word.
Magical.
Lovely. Thank you so much, ma'am, for being on our show. I think you've beautifully described the experience that Glenburn has. There are so many things about the hotel that does not come out on many of the OTAs like Make My Trip or anything else, which we sort of were able to delve into today. Anyone who's probably making a decision will probably be able to see this and make a better decision, be it if they are visiting the boutique hotel in Darjeeling or the penthouse in Calcutta. Thank you so much. If this episode inspires you, hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us your favorite heritage hotel experience. Let's keep the stories alive, one host at a time.